we're kicking off our first panel discussion at the Florida Holocaust Museum, examining the fundamentals of anti-Semitism and the nuances in the digital age. For that conversation, I'm joined by Erin Blankenship, the interim executive director of the Florida Holocaust Museum, Sarah Emmons, the Florida Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League, and Joe Probasco, the immediate past president of the Tampa Jewish Community Centers and Federation. Welcome to you all. I'd like to get your impressions on why you think it is anti-Semitism is treated differently, is not centered in the way that other historic hatreds are in modern America.
I think that there are a lot of folks who don't understand anti-Semitism, who, when we talk about racism over the past year and a half, the media has really done quite a bit of work to talk about racism, as they should in the incidents around racism. But I think that there's really an opportunity for us as a community to talk more about anti-Semitism and what's happening, to help our communities understand the context of anti-Semitism. So not just modern anti-Semitism, but really the history of the Jewish community, how many times the Jewish community has been displaced culturally over time. I think there's just a lot of work to educate our community, and that's something the ADL is currently doing and working on, is helping to work with the media to make sure that our communities really understand anti-Semitism and can speak out against it.
Joe, what do you think?
We're, I think, in a very interesting place, at least from the Jewish community's perspective. And I think traditionally, you would see it from one segment of society and not necessarily the other. And what I mean by that is, you're familiar with anti-Semitism on the right. I mean, the right in terms of political terminology. We're now in a place where you have anti-Semitism coming from the left as well. And also kind of the third leg of that stool is just extreme Islam. And so the Jewish community is being hit with these issues from all sides. So if you ask the right wing, the alt-right, whatever you care to characterize them as, what's wrong with the Jews? Well, the Jews are the socialists. And if you ask the far left, well, what's wrong with the Jews? It's the Jews are the capitalists. And so what you find is this conflict that, depending on whoever wants to trade in anti-Semitism, will find a way to articulate some anti-Semitic trope, and they'll use it, you know, oddly, the both extremes of the political spectrum will use the same types of tropes to further their narrative on whatever that might be.
The Anti-Defamation League has found a worrying uptick in those incidents. What do the numbers tell us about recent years?
Every year, ADL conducts and publishes an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. And in 2020, while we saw a national decline of anti-Semitic incidents by 4%, the numbers here in the state of Florida were actually quite different. We saw a 40% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in Florida in 2020. That increase is incredibly alarming for our Florida community and makes the work that the ADL and other groups do so important to combat anti-Semitism.
Can you give us some examples in Florida of the incidents that you're talking about?
Absolutely. So when the pandemic began, we started to see really painful incidents of Zoom bombing happening. We had an incident in North Central Florida where a Jewish funeral service was interrupted by a Zoom bomber who came on to speak anti-Semitic tropes and anti-Semitic hate speech. We've seen anti-Semitic incidents pop up in schools with relation to both Zoom bombing and with in-person experiences where other students and community members say hateful things to school children. So we've seen all types of anti-Semitic incidents here in Florida, and despite the pandemic and so much of a move to virtual platforms, we've continued to see increasing rates of anti-Semitic incidents.
This museum was the target of a vandalism attack, wasn't it? Tell me about it.
It was. On the morning of May 27th, very early, I was called to be made aware that the museum was a victim of an anti-Semitic hate crime where the vandals graffitied "Jews are guilty" with swastikas on the side of our building. I was lucky enough that by the time I came to work that day, the St. Petersburg Police Department had already put up barriers, painted over it, because, words like that are extremely hateful. But I would say that It really recharged all of our staff and our board because we know how important our mission is here at the Florida Holocaust Museum to continue to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate people about the inherent worth and dignity of all human life. And I would also say that even though our staff come from all walks of life, it was very personal to each one of us. And you know, it just confirmed our mission all the more.
Joe Probasco, when something like that happens, in a place of symbolic significance, does it still send a kind of electric impulse through the Jewish people who live in this area?
Tremendously, and I believe it being marked on this particular facility had a more probably grateful impact than it would otherwise. Again, the challenge you have here with anti-Semitism is rarely does it start with violence. Rarely does it start with graffiti. It usually starts with respect to the internet and dialogue online. And as that increases, people become more emboldened. This is not something, and I think this is a mistake people make consistently, this is not a Jewish problem. It impacts Jews, but it's not a Jewish problem. And by pure numbers, and I'm not educating anybody here about this, we cannot defeat anti-Semitism as a community on our own. We can't. We are absolutely reliant on the non-Jewish members of this Tampa community, St. Petersburg community, the United States, to stand arm in arm and tell the world this is just not acceptable. And I think the challenge also people forget, and if you study your history, you will see this is pretty consistent, is, and the saying was, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And what follows after that is hatred expressed again. Well, geez, if we can get away saying this about the Jews, let's say it about the Asians. Let's say it about the blacks. And I think you've seen that happen in this country over the last 5 to 7 years pretty consistently. And it's really, when will the silent majority, the moderates stand up and say, this is not my community. My community is one where we welcome the other, where we're comfortable with the other, and embrace that. And that's the biggest test, litmus test for me is, how does the non-Jewish community react? And I will tell you personally, in 2018 with the Tree of Life synagogue shootings, the non-Jewish community reacted tremendously. I was contacted by people all over the country of just, this is not my United States. I am so sorry this happened. What can we do to help? I will tell you in May, with the latest conflict between Israel and Hamas, and what happened at the Florida Holocaust Museum, I didn't get too many phone calls. And that was very unsettling. And I think that's something that, you know, continues to be very unsettling, because the silence is what's going to lead to, again, more and more and more.
Erin, what do you think?
It's sometimes hard to put your finger on, hard to define what anti-Semitism is until something big happens, like the graffiti here at the Florida Holocaust Museum, or something horrible like the Tree of Life shooting. Media isn't covering it otherwise until something, you know, really major happens. So again, it's back to education, and, you know, us needing the Florida Holocaust Museum, the work of the ADL and others, needing to educate people about what anti-Semitism is, about all of its forms, so that we can fight it.
You've come up with a high-tech way of keeping the survivors with us to keep on teaching lessons, haven't you?
Absolutely. Our mission here at the museum, we think the best way to teach the lessons of the Holocaust is to connect one individual today to one individual who experienced the Holocaust. Those personal interactions are the most important when we're talking about building empathy for each other and compassion for each other. And so, yeah, we have partnered with the USC Shoah Foundation in California on their Dimensions and Testimony project. And next month, we're debuting it as a permanent exhibition here at the Florida Holocaust Museum. We've interviewed 4 local survivors who each sat through a week of almost 1,000 questions. So that way, for years into the future, they'll be able to have conversations with people. my grandchildren will be able to have a conversation with Mary Wygotsky, which, is really important to us. And it's really important to fighting hate, to fighting anti-Semitism.
Erin, tell us about the exhibition in this room, and particularly the works of art that people at home may see in the background as we're talking.
I'd love to. We are in the Herbert and Isabel Savell Teaching Gallery, and Dr. Savell is actually a physician in upstate New York who several years ago made it his personal goal to carve the likenesses of children who were murdered in the Holocaust. And so what you see here are individual carvings of children. These are all French children, as documented by historian Serge Klarsfeld. And I think all but one of these people were murdered. So his goal was to personalize the history of the Holocaust. He knows that looking at a number like 6 million or the 1 million Jewish children who were murdered is really kind of unfathomable. But if we can think of each individual person, character with all of their hopes and dreams and favorite things and where they went to school, all of these characteristics that people have, the Holocaust becomes much more understandable.
It is so moving, even with the brief backstory, and stunning, really, to consider the death toll that's symbolized on these walls. Just a remarkable piece of work. There is in modern America, certainly in Florida, a strain of American, for want of a better term, philo-Judaism that's exuberant and loud and out, but on second examination, looks forward to a world where we love Jews so much that we're looking forward to the day when there aren't any, because they all convert. Is that a shadow form of anti-Semitism? Joe, have you come across people who just love Jews so much that they can't wait till there aren't any? Out of love, mind you.
It is certainly an interesting and complicated situation that is present in this, particularly in this country. And I think the challenge you have as a Jewish community, if I go back to my prior comment with respect to how I felt, at least personally, in May, was the phone calls that I did get were from largely evangelical Christians. That is who is supporting the Jewish community most vocally. And so when you hear silence from other presumed allies, then you kind of, question, how do we walk this balance, this tightrope? What the, and I think it's largely the evangelical Christian community does a tremendous job of is educating 90% of this country where there are no Jews about Israel and about Judaism and about Jews. As they say, the reason that the senator from Iowa supports Israel is because of the work that the evangelical Christian groups are doing in those states, because there's just not a Jewish presence to really do the work. So, it's definitely a complicated issue, but it's something that, we struggle with as a community, but it's also something where we will take any ally we can that supports the Jewish community and letting us live in a secure, environment.
Sarah, has the digital world given cover to people who would never stand up in a public meeting and say Hitler was right, which has been a common online message, but will go home and in their den or in front of their laptop type Hitler was right into a website?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we're both seeing online rhetoric. We're also seeing that rhetoric more often in in-person meetings. We're seeing extremist groups come to school board meetings and speak out. So one of the things we're doing at the ADL to combat online hatred is working closely with different social media companies to hold them accountable. We recently came out with a report grading some of the different social media companies and their response and their policies around hate speech. And we think that most social media companies have a way to go in terms of really protecting their constituents and our communities. And that's something that we at ADL want to be partners with them and helping them and amend their policies so that they can better protect against hate speech online.
I want to thank you all for a terrific conversation. Erin Blankenship, Sarah Emmons, and Joe Probasco.